Welcome to a special edition of Crimewatch UK and to some very unusual appeals.
Tonight we'll be showing you the faces of some of Britain's most wanted criminals and why it's desperately important you help find them.
"20 years. And we'll show you some remarkable facts about what happened in that time, as well as challenging you to help find those most wanted faces. You'll see some of the notable successes too. But first, what they call a sticker. A case that's remained unsolved for all those 20 years, and indeed was the first reconstruction we ever showed. It's a macabre story made even more bizarre by this letter that was sent to the police by a man who claims to be the murderer. Do you recognise the style? It may have been written with a ruler and a mapping pen, and look in particular at those peculiar S's that are written in the form of exclamation marks. It's a bit like some computer shorthand. Now, the letter could be a decoy, it could be a hoax, but if you know who wrote it, you could save someone's life. In fact, now police fear that in the 20 years since, the culprit must have struck again, and probably repeatedly so. 2 decades ago, Chris Barnfather was a young detective in Nottinghamshire Constabulary. This remains the most emotionally draining case he has ever dealt with. All those years, he's stuck with it. The victim was Colette Eram. 20 years on, Chris reviews the original film and reveals new evidence.
Well, Colette was abducted from the side of the road. She was probably struck at that time. She certainly had a head injury which would support that. She was dragged into a vehicle. She would have been terrified. She was driven 2 miles up the road, probably fighting in the back of the vehicle. She was dragged from the vehicle where she had her clothing removed, and she was subjected to the most appalling and violent sexual attack. She was then strangled, and she was left to die in a field a few miles from her home.
The police have built up a picture of the killer's movements from the letter and from corroborating evidence.
I was in a hut for hours waiting for a girl to return from horse riding. No one saw me.
About 5 miles from Keyworth, there are riding stables there. Young girls, predominantly, exercise their horses on a Sunday afternoon. Sometime before 4 o'clock on that particular Sunday, a man was seen loitering around an old hut, which is next to the stables. I say a man, I believe that's our man. Certainly there's evidence that that man was inside the hut. We found a piece of rag which was semen stained, which indicates he was there for some sort of sexual excitement, no doubt evoked by the young girls on horseback. He saw his opportunity when the Ford Fiesta turned up, stole it and drove away in the direction of Keyworth. This whole tragic sequence of events that led to Colette's brutalised death started with the theft of that motor vehicle. This individual spent over 3 hours in the Keyworth area driving around looking for a young girl. He certainly followed other young girls that afternoon. He made approaches to other young girls. They were fortunate. Colette wasn't. She left home shortly after 8. She was certainly seen at about 8:05 by friends who acknowledged her. She was seen again at 8:10 by people who knew her. At 8:15, only 5 minutes later, a resident heard screams outside of his home. Repeated screams and shouts of no. He went to the door. He could see nobody. He saw a vehicle driving away at speed. Nobody saw Colette Eram alive again.
What can I get you?
A pint of orange lemonade, please.
The Generous Britain's a small village pub about 5 miles from Keyworth. It doesn't entertain many passing customers, mostly local. He engaged in conversation with the landlady. That conversation tended to indicate he had some knowledge of the area. The landlady actually noticed while serving him that on the back of his right hand he had blood, quite visible blood stains in the creases of his hand. He appeared to have noticed that she noticed and was bothered by that.
Where's the toilet?
Oh, just back there.
When Colette was found to be missing, there was an extensive search conducted throughout the village by members of her immediate family and her boyfriend's family. That continued throughout the night, obviously with police assistance. At about 9:20 the following morning, police officers were called to a field on the outskirts of Keyworth, off Thirlby Lane, where a body of a young female had been found. Unfortunately, the grandfather and the brother of Colette saw officers attending and actually followed them onto the field area, and there they were to see the horrifying sight of Colette lying naked and brutalised in that field. A fact that the police have never released before, because we always like to hold a little bit back, is the fact that Colette had had an item of clothing actually tied to her wrist. It wasn't an item that had been used in any way to restrain her or to incapacitate her. It was tied there almost as a sign to whoever found her. The way her body was posed has never been released before. She wasn't left with any dignity. She was left in a position which could only horrify anybody who stumbled across her body. The resting of her clothing had been thrown into a culvert, but an item of jewellery was missing, almost as if the offender had taken a trophy and had left his victim in a field displayed for all.
That was all 21 years ago. This is Colette's mother, Jackie Kirkby. 21 years, but presumably hasn't got any easier.
No, it hasn't. I don't think it ever does, and I think any mother would tell you the same thing. It's 21 years in October, and I remember it as if it was yesterday. You know, I go out and I see girls that Colette was at school with. They've got young children. I would probably be the same now, be a grandmother to children that Colette would possibly have had. It's very, very difficult. It's something that you never ever come to terms with. And the one person I think that really has suffered in all of this is my son. He actually saw Colette in that field, and I always remember him saying to me, "Mum, you didn't see the way she was lying there. I did." And he'll never forget that. He'll take that to his grave with him. And things like this, you never get over it. Well, it's just terrible, and I would never wish this on anyone.
And Chris, the frightening thing is, this isn't just an old case. This could be happening to other people. Perhaps not murder, but you think this man is a serial offender?
It's almost inevitable, I think, Nick, that this individual will have sexually assaulted before he killed Colette, and probably sexually assaulted since.
Now, we've got partial DNA, so if people have got any suspicions about somebody, you can easily eliminate. You've also got an EFIT, but you're very concerned that people shouldn't take this too literally, because there have been a lot of conflicting descriptions of the man.
Absolutely. Witnesses gave different descriptions at the time, and although it's maybe a backcloth for viewers to actually focus on, I'd actually ask them to try and connect maybe that image with, was this individual in the Keyworth area at the time, living there, maybe visiting there, maybe working there?
He obviously knew it, and the one thing that we do know is pretty accurate is the hair. He had sort of thick, curly black hair, was it, or dark hair anyway?
All the witnesses were very united on that issue.
He'd now be mid-40s or early 40s, perhaps around 40 years of age. We're not entirely sure. What about body height and height and that sort of thing?
Probably 5'10" muscular build.
So maybe putting on a bit of weight now. And as you say, he must have had local connections. He must have got there somewhere, somehow, if he didn't have his own car. And this fetish for stalking girls. Now, this is a behaviour he presumably exhibited at other stages and has exhibited since.
I would suspect so, yes. He clearly had followed a number of young girls around in the Keyworth area on that night before he actually found Colette.
So there'll be perhaps police officers elsewhere in the country, prison officers, psychiatric social workers, psychiatrists and so forth, people who may see somebody, and I may have seen them recently, with a similar method of operation.
Yes, I believe this man may well have gone through the prison system at some point in time subsequent to Colette's killing, and I would appeal to those professionals to come forward to us tonight. The
taunting with the letter. One wonders if he might be watching Crimewatch and might ring you tonight, might ring you.
I would invite him to phone me.
You'd invite him. I should make the point, incidentally, that no calls to Crimewatch, we always say this publicly, no calls to Crimewatch are ever traced. So if he does ring, you can't trace him, no, but you still want him to call. We don't record them either, incidentally.
It's an opportunity to speak